ready for this interview? You've done interviews and conversations with a lot of people, bro, but this cat, like, he knows everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly about you. Are you ready? Guys, what I'm talking about is I'm getting ready to interview probably the most important mentor in my life, at least business mentor. His name's Steve Bergstrom, and I work with the guy. In fact, I worked for the guy for 17 years. He'll probably tell you I still work for him. But I'm a little nervous about this interview, okay? This guy knows everything about me. He remembers when I was very, very immature. But I think he'll tell you that I've always been a producer. But man, this guy I've worked with since I was 27 years old. I'm gonna have a conversation with him, how he came about building a company from a startup I think he was 28 at the time, and he built a $30 billion company in less than 10 years. This is before 2000, okay? This is before unicorns were anything but just unicorns. So I'm a little nervous, I gotta tell you. The guy is one of the smartest cats I've ever known in my life. I mean, in my life. And I've probably had more challenges and debates and arguments with this cat than any other person outside of somebody I was married to. Just a brilliant, brilliant man. He now sits on the board of Williams Energy, one of the largest energy companies in the world. And he's gonna tell you, I think, that he and I and almost everyone around us underestimated the level of disruption that could occur. And I'm hopeful that we will discover in that interview that when you're moving into these highly disruptive moments in an industry, that even the players on the field underestimate the size of the opportunities. Guys, this is Steve Bergstrom. He is currently, we're gonna just jump into it, Steve. He is currently chairman of the board of Williams Energy, one of the largest infrastructure energy companies in the United States. I met Steve in 1987. He didn't know this, but I was interviewing for a job. Ron Mitchmore got me into the offices, and I would have taken a job with Steve and this company called Natural Gas Clearinghouse for zero. I think I was making 70 grand a year. I was miserable at Seagull Energy. It was a platform that was never going to let me really flex my muscles. And I knew this startup, I was 26 or 27. I just had a feeling this startup was going to be a colossal opportunity. And little did I know it would be much, much, much bigger than I ever imagined. I suspect you imagined. But let's talk about Steve and kind of how you came about the whole natural gas clearinghouse piece, you know, your background, your education, stuff like that, Steve.
Well, I grew up in Iowa and went to Iowa State and got a degree in finance from Iowa State in the late 70s. And there were really no job opportunities in the Midwest. The farm crisis was going on at the time when I graduated. So I really didn't have a whole lot of opportunities. And I had an uncle who was in Houston, who was in the energy business. He was an exploration geologist. And he sent me the want ads, and I came to Houston and got on with a company called Transco, pipeline company, which is now owned by Williams. And that's how I started. And I started in the tax department there with Transco. And after about 10 minutes in the tax department, I said, I can't do this any longer. What's the best job in the company? And they said gas supply. But you got to be here 25 years to get into gas supply. Everybody wants to do it. And I said, I don't have that long. And so long story short, in about 6 months, I worked my way to get into gas supply. At Transco, learned a ton about the energy business there. And then got hired away to Northern Natural Gas, who's a Midwest pipeline company out of Omaha, Nebraska. I was involved with them in basically putting the merger together to create Enron back in 85. So I saw, and I was pretty young at that time, but I saw a lot of things relative to big companies, how they work, the politics, and all that stuff, and how my role in the company was to be a kind of a culture buster. The company had been around since the 30s. It was very engineering operations oriented, very slow to get things done, and my role at Northern was to be as I said, a culture buster. And I realized at a young age how career limiting that was when you're busting culture up and everybody around you hates you because you're doing things different. You always ask questions. You challenge the status quo. But I kind of like that, and I kind of like that role. But I figured pretty quickly post Enron that I wasn't going to be able to do that there, and I didn't really like it.
You
So,
mean post Enron prior to, this is in the 80s as well, before Enron's, the
oh
Jeff
yeah, yeah. This was
generation.
post putting the companies together. I stayed around for about a year after the merger closed. It closed in I think May of '85, and I stayed around, but I constantly was looking for something else that could challenge me and where I didn't have to be part of a big company.
So, Steve, let me
Um,
ask you a question on that, if I could. How old were you at the time when you realized you're at Transco? So, guys, what he's describing is this is before the disruption moment. So, you had all
right.
these really large companies, and they're all trying to figure out, hey, what are we going to do when we grow up? So, they started merging, and the environment that he got into, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, none of these people ever had to be commercial. By commercial, I mean understand costs, cut pennies. I remember meeting Mitch Moore at United, and we were going to fill a 2 billion cubic feet a day pipe up from Laredo to the Gulf of Mexico. I said, hey, well, why are we paying somebody $7.36? Why not $7.26? He said, we don't trade on nickels and dimes. And that, I was 21 years old. I'm like, oh my God, 2 billion cubic feet a day. Now, this was before deregulation, but this was the culture you were running up against, right? No commercial acumen, and that must have driven you crazy, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, early on at Transco, I became friends with a senior guy in gas supply that was an Iowa State graduate. That's how we got connected. And I remember walking into his office. I was like 22, and I said, this whole model on how to make money was regulated rate base, and it was the more you spend, the more you make. You made a guaranteed return on your capital that you spent.
Cost
And I
plus.
remember walking into him going, this makes no sense. I just spent 4 years and going to college, and they kind of teach you, buy low, sell high, keep the difference, right? And now you're telling me I'm going in a business model that the more you spend, the more you make. Said that can't last. Now this is pre any of that. And
Right.
he just did one of these, shut up, kid, go back to your office. This is the way it's always been. And I just kept going, this doesn't feel right. This is not a business model that's sustainable long term. Little did I know that 1986, 87, Reagan deregulates the natural gas industry, and completely commercializes the business. Took a while to get there. In '87, I mean, the pipelines which I had grown up in controlled all the access to customers and to producers on both ends. But I thought when that happened, I thought, well, this is going to be real. Now that I think it was going to blow up to this, no way. But I thought it was an interesting, intriguing. It fit more what my mindset was changing the model and the way this whole industry worked, and putting that commercial acumen into transactions instead of just the more you spend, the more you make. Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go spend capital and making a 12% return on it guaranteed. I mean, it's just the whole model just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
So so I stayed for a year, when Enron merger went together, and then Chuck Watson was at Conoco, and he left to start Natural Gas Clearinghouse, um, and hired about 5 or 6 guys, one of which was Ron Mitchmore, who were kind of what I'll call kind of industry veteran type guys, very high integrity, type people, but not
Safe,
much commercial.
safe corporate people that would make a
Right,
startup look good,
right, but
but I like
not
me.
very
Yeah.
right, yeah, not very commercial, and really not willing because they culturally they weren't willing to push the envelope anywhere. And so Chuck tried to get me to come on board. Then I turned him down because I wasn't ready to kind of make the jump yet. So about a year later, I was tired of the fight internally, putting the companies together at Enron. And so then, long story short, I jumped with him, and I told him walking in, I said, the first thing I said I'm going to do is, and I like all these people that you've hired, but they're good people, but they're not going to work if we're going to take this thing and really grow it. And to his credit, he said, "Okay." He said, "You do what you got to do," because he was struggling at that point. He'd been operating for a year. They weren't making any money. They were really struggling. And I said, "You got to let me try to do it my way, and I'll hire the kind of people that I think can really do this." And being in the pipeline business, we knew all the customers. So I tended to kind of lead towards people that were in that pipeline business, but were what I call big company renegades that never fit the mold of the big companies, challenged everything in the big companies, and got tamped down over and over like I did, because I ran into people like that in our organization and in the industry. So that's what I did, was I targeted people like that to go after them, and hire those kind of people. And I wanted intentionally to hire people who would challenge everything, even me. I was never worried about hiring people that would challenge me and say, "I don't agree with you." In fact, I think that's positive. I think that's healthy, um, because personality people like us, we're going to tend to run over you if you don't challenge us. And I don't think that's healthy for an organization. I think you got to put people around you that are good, that are smart, that are willing to push the envelope, and that are honest and genuine, and who think about things completely differently than the way things have always been. Particularly when you're busting an industry up that had been around for 40, 50, 60 years,
Yeah.
that completely got turned on its ear.
Yeah, let's go back 1 second to so Chuck was struggling. Chuck's a brilliant guy, good visionary. He's struggling. Why did he need you? Because I have this thesis about the two-man business model, that you actually need two different type leaders in a company to really make it go broad and deep. And those personalities need, like, I think you guys were a perfect combo. I'm not gonna say what you had over him or vice versa, but I thought the combo between you two was pretty good. Not for two ego guys. I mean, you're both very strong personalities. I
Mhm.
saw it working really well. How long did it take him to convince you, and how did you lean into him on your negotiation, moving from a big corporate? You're 25 at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. 25, 26. Yeah.
Um, like what was the deal like? How long did he chase you?
Well, he to chase me for a year. And this is classic Chuck. I was in Omaha. I was at the time being promised to have the biggest job in all of gas supply, running all of gas supply for the combined pipelines. And those are like massive pipelines. And I was naive enough to think that they would actually follow through and do that for me, at 25 years old. What I learned in retrospect was they were just telling me that to keep me on the hook, that they really didn't intend to do that. And I got frustrated. And one day he called me. I was in Omaha, he was in Houston, and he just to chat. And he said, "You sound frustrated." And I said, "Yeah, I'm getting really tired of these corporate bureaucrats here who just are stuck in the mud." And he said, "Well, what are you doing for dinner tonight?" This is like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I
Mm.
said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I'm coming to Omaha. We're going to have dinner tonight." And he sensed that I was ready. And boom, he flies to Omaha, and then I basically said, "Okay, I'll do it, but I'm not going to move to Houston. I'm going to commute for a year just in case it doesn't work,"
Yeah.
because I had a wife and two kids. And This was a big step change going out of, I took a very large pay cut in exchange for equity in a company that was worth nothing, negative nothing. My wife thought I was crazy
Was
to
right.
take a big pay cut. It was one of those things. I had good advice from a buddy of mine that I respected, who said, if you ever get the opportunity, you can live a very good life getting a paycheck and a bonus. But he said, if you really want to create generational wealth, take equity when it's worth nothing. And he gave me that advice when I was 22 years old, and I remember it, still remember it.
Who was that, Steve?
A guy named Jim Walters. Um,
Figured that's who that was. Yeah.
yeah, he gave me that advice, which was hard to do at 22 years old or 25 years old.
And
But
you've used people like that your whole life, right? You've gone
right,
to people that were smarter than you, more seasoned than you. This is a huge message. Like you and I didn't have a formal mentor type relationship, but I give you credit for helping me a lot and for holding me responsible. Like you were the alpha dog I needed as a kid, actually. Not that you were my dad or anything. I never treated you like that. But I did like the structure. I liked the risk management. Although I hated the Glenn Lapharts of the world of risk management, in reality, I actually like risk management and you putting pressure on me. It helped me perform better.
mhm.
Your point, hey, being challenged by someone that you respect with real logical data. We didn't always agree. In fact, we probably had the best conversations when we weren't agreeing. We were all arguing. That doesn't happen today in snowflake corporate land. You can't have like you and I would look at you, you're fucking crazy, man. That's wrong. Let's bet $10,000 on it. Like we try to embarrass each other. And it wasn't out of trying to shame each other. It was literally about how convinced is this cat? Like, will he really bet something significant on his view? Because we were all trying to understand what prices we're doing. We were having dollar swings on a decatherm
Mhm.
energy, and it was violent type of commodity risk. And you're trying to
But I've always carried that on. That was that because I'm not the smartest tool in the shed. Yeah, I try to get really good people around me. I've done that even at Williams. Get really good people around, and then the style that I use that has been very effective at every level of what I've startup to running the company to public companies, running American Midstream, running, charge of Williams and all that stuff is I challenge things that a lot of times I'll agree with your position, but I'll flip it around and challenge it. Even though I agree with what you're saying, just to hear your conviction on how really strong you believe in it. And I do this to this day at Williams. The joke in the boardroom, always with their staff, is where's the point that Bergstrom's going to get me on,
I
and
know.
where's he going to challenge me on? And it's almost predictable when we go into a meeting. They'll go, "Yep, that's exactly where I thought you were going to go, and you did. And here's how what I believe about it." And so that's worked pretty effectively. And I tend to kind of pick things up from people that I see and use them. But the whole key to all of that stuff is you got to have great people around you. And the key to getting the company jump started before you even came on board was getting 5 or 6 of the core guys that I hired that I had worked with that I knew. I can be fooled pretty easily, usually in an interview, but when I work with somebody and I interact with them on the front line, you can't fool anybody that way. You're exposed and you can see how they operate. And so I tend to always, even today, I tend to lean towards like board members when we're hiring new board members. I if somebody's worked with them on a board and can give me that I trust, that I respect, and they can give me a good read on them and how they operate and how they deal under pressure and the kinds of thought processes that they have, I'll hire them 10 times over versus a headhunter who brings me somebody who looks like the best person ever on paper and comes with all these high accolades, but yet nobody has really worked with them before. And so I've done that really from the very beginning all the way to Williams. And it all gets down to hiring the best people, paying them competitively challenging them, keeping sideboards up, which I had to do a lot with you, and you and others. But
Side board is what?
basically giving them parameters to do their job, but not get out so far out over your skis that it affects the rest of the organization and the company. We were private back then. You could do a lot of things back when you're private that you can't do when you're public. There's different, the sideboard's got to be a little taller and a little less wide, but part of managing aggressive type A personality people is being able to allow them to flourish and allow them to do what they do best, but yet keep them in a path that works for the whole, not the individual. And everybody, and that was a challenge. That was a big challenge with the group that we had, because we had a lot of opinions. We had a lot of people that wanted to do it a certain way or other ways, or they'd want to this or that, and that was probably my biggest challenge in the early days, was trying to keep a bunch of hard chargers who really wanted to do well, and kind of keep them heading for the whole, not just the individual.
Yeah. That's I think the alchemy of putting all these personalities. I mean, the people that are listening to this won't really fully appreciate the personalities we had there, but I would not say that. Well, look, the way you said it, they were rogue corporate guys. They never really fit in. I don't know the personality, like the childhood of most of those guys, because we never talked about that. We were just, hey, how much money did we make this month? There was no like personal lovey-dovey stuff. I mean, you and I have probably never even been fishing. We've done very few things casually, but our relationship wasn't that. I was a professional football player working for a professional football team, hoping the coach would put me in. Like that, and that's what we had. We had just a bunch of guys that want to be quarterbacks, right? And you had to like make sure that everybody was in their place. I commend you for the job you did, because like I was a handful, but you had like 10 of us.
Right. It's hard.
Yeah.
But it also is the reason why it was successful.
Right.
And that's not easy to do. And you were asking about the Chuck, the two of us, how it works so well together. Chuck is probably the most creative person that I've ever met in the business world. There's a lot of people who are creative in other things, but in the business world, he would have 50 ideas of things that we ought to do.
He thought
and
all of them were great ideas too. Huh?
My role was getting rid of 48 of them that wouldn't work, that we couldn't execute on, and taking the two that go, maybe that one will work. Maybe we ought to pursue that a little bit more. And then Chuck, you go off and think of another 50 things that might work. He also was probably one of the best. I mean, he never met a deal that he doesn't want to do. And I was always boiling it down to, I'm the operating guy, right? I got to make sure it works. And so it was a good combination, because I kind of pulled him back when we would sit in front of somebody and Chuck would say, well, we can do this and we can do that. And I'm kind of going, not really, but we can probably figure out how to do that. Because like you pointed out, I mean, we're starting a business. I mean, people need to understand we're starting a business, and our competitors at this point are Shell, Exxon, Texaco, Mobil, all these massive producers who control, all the gas in this country. And I used to describe it as they're the big aircraft carriers in the space, and we're the PT boat that are running around in between them, and we're popping up and we're firing a shot at them, and then we're disappearing again, and we're popping up and firing another shot at them. And our ability to adapt and to culturally move quickly, because at the end of the day, we should have never been allowed to exist if it wasn't for those guys. Were so slow. They were fighting the change. They wanted to keep things as they were, like you can imagine any other corporate world would be. It took me almost a year to get Exxon to agree to do business with us. And I used to comment, I mean, every week I'm going to meet with Guy's name was Judd Miller, who ran Exxon's gas business, and I just could not get them to do business with us until he was an older guy. He retired, put a new guy in who was a little bit younger, and I found out he was a wine guy. He grew up in California, and he was a wine guy. So I take him to Augusta National, play golf, and we go in the wine cellar there. And all of a sudden, I get an Exxon deal for $50 million a day at Henry Hub for like 10 years. It took me a year. It's like dealing with the federal government. But that was the advantage that we had. We could move quickly, and we could adapt to the market change. And we had commercial people who thought differently, like you. You didn't have any energy background. In fact, we hired quite a few people who didn't have energy background, because people without energy background would come in and go, well, why are you doing it this way? This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And that's the kind of stuff when you're starting a business like that, where you're at a serious disadvantage from a, balance sheet and size and all that. You got to have that kind of thought process, doing it differently, doing things that Exxon's scared to do, because it's outside the box and way outside the box. We're not talking about on the fringes. We're talking about way outside. And when we started growing, I remember this to this day. I mean, one of the key components that I had was there was a company that was part of a producer group called Hadson, if you remember Gary back in the day. And they really got started ahead of anybody else in this kind of deregulated deal. But what the mistake they made, and the reason they blew up, was they tried to be all things to everybody, and they tried to grow to be national, and they got too spread out. And then guys like us were able to come in and pick them off because they got too, they didn't have the people and the resources and the ability to manage a nationwide company. We stayed pretty conservative relative where we were good at, because that's another little kind of philosophical thing that I still to this day with Williams use. Dance with the one that brung you. If you're good at something, continue to execute on it, and you can actually use that same skill set in other areas, but drive that. I'll give you an example with Williams. Go back 5 years ago with Williams. I've been in the board since 2016. 5 years ago, everybody was wanting to get in the oil transportation business, okay? Build oil pipelines out of the Permian and all this other stuff. And I kept challenging the team, and I said, look, what allows us to differentiate ourselves? Why are we a better crude oil transporter than we are, competing against anybody else that's in that space? Never got any really good answers, other than the fact that that's what everybody was doing at the time. And so what I challenged them was, I said, we touch a third of the natural gas in this country. And I said, yeah, it's not in favor 5 years ago when we were talking about this, but you know what? It will be in the future. And if you can position yourself to be the best at large project management and the natural gas company that is worldwide known as the natural gas company, I promise you it will come back. And voila, here we are today. No one's talking about, they just had the COP28 summit in Dubai that our chairman or our CEO was at. And now everybody's talking about nuclear and natural gas have to be part of the future, which is exactly what has to happen in order to reduce emissions around the world. And who's viewed as the top natural gas infrastructure player in the world? Williams, because we stuck with what we were good at, we executed on it, and we continued to drive that when it wasn't in favor.
Yeah, this is a big mistake that corporates make, because they're driven by growth. They go into spaces they have no business. Look, I sold when Chuck said he was going to go into fiber. I'll never forget. I thought y'all were going to kick me out of the board meeting that day, because I was like, "Hey, Chuck, anybody have any comments?" I said, "Hey, yeah, can I short the company?" Our own company. And he just like lambasted me, man. He's like, "Hey, you only know how to short." And I'm like, "Dude, this is a bad idea. Okay, when you can put light down a hair fiber and just change the color, like you have infinite supply, like it's just going to keep showing up." But he was doing what Wall Street. We were public then, so he was getting pressure from Wall Street to keep
Mhm.
up with the Joneses, right? And that's what happens. And you
Well,
get,
keep up with Enron. I mean, basically, we were kind of viewed as kind of the competitor to Enron at that point.
yeah.
And Enron was pushing that and, electric deregulation and all that kind of stuff. And so we were being pushed a lot. Um, but I will say, retro looking back on it, what we didn't figure out back in that day, and that would have been late '90s, 2000, the explosion of the growth of the natural gas industry. We didn't see coming. When I started in the gas industry in like 1980, it was like 17 billion cubic feet a day average throughput. Now it's 105 billion cubic feet a day.
Yeah, then
So
that's really important, right? Because didn't everyone say that if you deregulated this market and allowed it to trade as a commodity short term, there'd be no investment, there'd be no growth. And what happened? You open the market up, you let capitalism work, and it goes from 17 billion cubic feet a day to 100, and what, 7 billion cubic,
105. Yeah.
105, a 10xer, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you don't have to have everything locked down and secured with cost plus and protection. This market grew, even though the amount of producers contracted from like 23,000 to what, now you got 400 energy
Yeah.
players in the United
Right.
States, and we have
Right.
more energy than we've ever had.
Right. And competitive. So what it's done is the deregulation that was done back in the '80s has actually allowed us to build an entire gas industry that is by far the cheapest of anywhere in the world. The big concern back in the '80s and '90s was, well, geez, our costs are so high, we can't compete with Qatar or Australia or places that have these big, massive gas finds that that are huge LNG producers that are going to just dominate the LNG market. That was the discussion back in the '80s and '90s. Well, to the contrary, deregulating it, allowing free market to work, allowing technology, the shale boom, and the whole thing that has transpired over the last 10, 15 years in energy in this country has now changed this country to be the lowest cost producer of natural gas in the world by a long shot, and allowed us to build an entire business called LNG exporting around the world to try to reduce emissions, get rid of all the coal plants around the world. We've reduced the coal plants in this country, coal production of electricity, by like 85% over the last 15 years. And we're going to knock the rest of them out in the next 5 to 7 years. Not because some regulator or some politician said this is what you're supposed to do. It's because the economics have driven out coal, because gas is more efficient, it's cheaper, lower capital cost, and the economics of it is what drove it. And that's the way markets should work, versus trying to regulate it. And that's a perfect example of what's happened over the last 15, 20 years of a commodity got deregulated. A company like ours, who jumped in on the early stage, was able to take advantage of the transition. And now it's a pretty good, well functioning gas business around the world.
But when you say
Let,
good functioning, like in my opinion, knowing quite a bit about a number of different markets, nat gas and electricity are the most stable industries in the world. There is no non-performance anymore, right? A hurricane used to roll through the Gulf of Mexico and you'd have force majeure event.
you
Now,
still have some of that, and the power side still struggles with it because of renewables. What's happening with renewables is when you have weather events, um, um, like this summer, when I make sure I get this right. When we were at really hot, 110 degrees kind of stuff in Texas, we have like 38,000 megawatts, I think, of wind installed in Texas, and I think we were running like 11,000 megawatts. So you got, when you have severe weather events, the renewables don't work as well, and And then because the wind doesn't blow when it gets really hot, as an example.
But what I'm talking about is when I contract with Exxon to buy gas at the Henry Hub or power at ERCOT, they have no force majeure if the wind goes down. I'm not asking them for their wind. I'm asking them for 100 kilowatts or 1,000
Right.
in BTU. Those markets don't fail like credit card transactions fail. Okay.
Oh,
Payment
right.
fail. Wire transfer fail. There's lots of non-settlement. There are none of these issues. Okay. This is a professional marketplace where every player has the exact same agreement. It's called an ISDA. This is the way you standardize an entire industry. You create ISDAs, and Steve and I and Exxon are all compared equally because we
Right.
all have the identical credit lines and we have the identical type agreement for performance. That standard has to move into the future of the world. If we can do this with nat gas and electricity, we have to be able to do this with, as we digitize planet Earth. Like, I think we're like, look what we're doing. We are living in the metaverse right this second. It's happening. And so I think that we're going to measure these events in the future, but they have to come with standards, right? You can't have, well, gosh, Gary's not going to show up to this call. Like, you can't have non-performance and then performance.
But what drove that in energy was the participants and the companies actually went together and said, we got to have a standard way of doing of interacting and transacting, because there was nothing like that in the old regulated world. So when you deregulate it, you got to have some rules. And
Yeah.
it was driven by the players. We were a big part of that at Clearinghouse, of kind of getting everybody together and saying, let's standardize this stuff. So everybody had the same, agreements and the same obligations and all that kind of stuff. And it's worked really well.
Let's shift a little bit. We're like 1990. Okay. You've made it through. You okay for time, by the way?
Yeah.
You've made it through the first 3, 4, 5 years of Natural Gas Clearinghouse. Actually, now we're starting to make some money. We've got Exxon, we've got Texaco. I mean, I remember Texaco holding $7 million of our money. I mean, we were treated like parasites, right? Vampires. We weren't really. We were adding a tremendous amount of liquidity. I remember you saying, hey, Texaco, we have the 7 million, so you can come to our offices and get it. Okay. Then we can talk about it. This is the kind of stuff this guy backed me up on that deal, because they were trying to screw us over an interruptible contract. But we're 1990, 91. You've done the deal with Morgan Stanley. You're getting ready to do the deal with British Gas, right? So you sell what? We sell 25% to British Gas.
We sold a third to them and a third to Nova.
Okay, got it. And so what happened then? Like, you're now starting to scale. You and Chuck are saying, what? I need partners. I need credit. What do you need?
Well, yeah, we'd gotten to the point to where we actually started. I mean, we started in '86, and we were starting to make money by 1990. But the Exxons, the Shells, those kind of guys were starting to kind of figure out that the genie wasn't going to go back in the bottle anytime soon.
Right.
And so they started being a little bit more commercial and aggressive. So we were like, we got to find some partners that can help us with a balance sheet. Amazingly, today this would never happen, but we did most of our transactions without any credit back in the day. Yeah, unbelievable. But it worked. But we could see it, once again, we're kind of looking forward, going, okay, what's going to be our inhibitor on our ability to continue to grow? And balance sheet was going to be one of them. And so we were wanting to expand into Canada. So Nova, Pan-Alberta was a huge supplier in Canada. Nova owned them at the time. And so we were trying to get access to supply, because in order for us to compete with the Shells, the Exxons, the Texacos, and those guys, we had to control supply to compete against them, because what they were using against us was, well, and I remember customers that would say, if I don't drive to work in the morning and if I don't see your name on a gas station, I'm not buying from you. Even though we were a lot more competitive, we were more flexible, there became a time where it was just like we were this, sleazy broker, if you will, kind of thing. And we weren't just a broker. I mean, we took title to the
Yeah.
commodity. We took risk. We stored it. We worked logistics. We did a lot of things that made us compete with those guys. So we brought those guys on
Well,
in like,
we knew selfishly that being a broker was not sustainable in this market. Not building a super company like a global energy company. You could not do that by not taking a principal position, proprietary position. Okay, I
right.
remember the Pan Alberta deals that like you. I think at some point you handed me that contract, said you manage it. I'm like, dude, can we just buy all of it from them? Like just
Yeah,
50 cents less and take it all. That really became the game, right? Can you move it all?
right.
Not so much on price, but can you move all the product right this second?
Right, because that's what they wanted. It was hard. Canadians, they wanted access to the U.S. market. You know, they don't they're not going to work selling it to Exxon. Exxon wasn't buying it, so they used guys like us to kind of help them down here, and it helped kind of springboard us into competing in markets like Chicago, places in the upper Midwest where we had a hard time competing, but then we could bring some firepower from the north
Right.
to do it. And so there was a tactical, strategic reason for doing it. Our two owners before that were two independent producers, Apache and Sammy Dan. And those guys, we marketed all of Apache's gas, okay, but they were relatively small. So we'd kind of outgrown them from like 89 to 92 and needed to take the next step. And so we did that periodically where we would see, you know, things that would inhibit our growth. And it's like, okay, we got to go do something else to solve the next thing around the corner, because our job, Chuck and my jobs both, were to kind of look around the corner, you know, a year or two down the road and try to knock down the barriers that were going to prohibit us from continuing to grow. You know, control of supply was important back in that day. It still is, but
Yeah.
was very important. And so instead of, we actually thought about getting into the drilling business to be able to control our own supply. We quickly realized that, boy, that's a big capital game that we didn't have. So then we flipped on that and said, well, geez, let's get into the natural gas liquids business and start buying processing plants, because then you can get it all at one spot. You can control all the supply there. And so that's how we got into the deal with Oxy that we did when we went public in 92 or 3, to buy their liquids business, Oxy's liquids business, and then ultimately Chevron's liquids business in 97, to control gas supply via large, big processing plants. So the capital costs would be a lot less,
Yeah.
and you could leverage.
So let's go to that time period. I want to talk a little bit about you're running the company, you're CEO. Clearly the company's no longer just struggling to make payroll, which it was at one time. And you got all these team members in place, but you see the expansion coming. You're adding volumes, you're adding strategic partnerships. How did you start moving people around? I mean, I remember asking for the role to move to the UK, and everybody like, nah, nobody's going to the UK that's working in the US, bringing in real revenue. You had to move Sinclair to futures. You had to move a lot of people around. How hard was that to do, Steve? Because it had to be terrifying, right?
Not as much. I mean, by then I'd worked with y'all enough where I knew what your skill sets were. You know, as far as the UK, we are owned by British Gas,
Okay, bro. Nobody
and
wants me.
well, British Gas was going to go through, or the UK was going to start deregulating. They were about 10 years behind the US, and British Gas was the Exxon of, you know, Texaco Shell of the UK. They controlled everything.
Yeah, they'd make
And
£4 billion net income the year I got there, 92.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it had listen, I remember going through this with you guys. It was hard to move people around. I mean, you say it was easy now. I remember there being fights over Sinclair going to futures. We're going to lose our entire West Coast business. Cardone can't possibly manage. You threw me into the West Coast, then you moved O'Donnell or Donnell, who would go on to blow up a company, right? Because he was so smart. And you had to move, like there was a lot of moving pieces to that company that required you to
But once again, but what you had to look at was the whole. Okay. And moving the pieces around, where things like the whole had to continue to grow and continue to do things. So you in the UK, what we needed a skill set in the UK was somebody who wouldn't take no for an answer, somebody who was going to bust open markets, somebody that was going to think outside the box, somebody that was going to be able to work with British Gas because they were our partner at that point. And you built a pretty dang good business over there because you got in on the early grounds and you had kind of learned what we'd done in the US and how we did it. And you kind of adapted that to the UK. The futures stuff with like Sinclair was we had to be able to have a mechanism to be able to hedge our business. At that point, you'd had a fledgling market for financial transactions. And in the old days before that, the only way to hedge the risk out of your business was you had to match up perfectly supply and demand and transportation all together, which was very difficult to do. You couldn't make the timing work on it. You couldn't make exactly. They were all what I used to call dirty hedges. So that you can kind of call them a hedge, but they really aren't. So you take a guy like Don Sinclair that you mentioned, really smart, intellectual numbers guy. So I'd seen him operate in the West, and I said, take a guy like that I trusted and put him in charge of the financial part of our business because I'd seen he had those skill sets there before. I didn't take anybody's word for yours or his or anybody else's. I'd seen it because I was right there with you guys trading and doing all the stuff that we were all doing together. And I saw what people's strengths were and what their weaknesses were. And so when I had a need, I would just pluck people out and go, okay, this is more important and I think I can backfill for what you were doing in your spot or Don or Gil or somebody else. I can backfill in those areas, but these are kind of new cutting edge stuff. And when you go to start new cutting edge subsets of your business, it's the same skill set as it takes to start the company in the beginning. They're just smaller pockets of it. But now you got more to lose, right? Because you got a business that's up and running and you're actually making money. You can't swing for the fence anymore because you can't be wrong or you can't be really wrong. So that was just a balancing thing. But continually look at the whole and look at how do you put the right, and I use a football analogy is how do I put the right guy at left tackle? He may be a better right tackle. But you know what? Overall for the team, I need him at left tackle. And that's where he's got to be because that's best for the overall. And that's the way I approached it.
Yeah. Yeah. So your approach is, hey, look, I'll take an 80% guy over perfect because you're not going to get perfect anyway, right?
And it may also be better for the overall
Right.
group and team because the overall is better.
What mistakes in doing that? It couldn't all been perfect, right? I mean, I got a couple of names that popped to mind, but what mistakes do you make when you're scaling like that and do you have any particular for the audience that they're trying to scale? Like what errors did you make while you're moving those pieces around?
The biggest errors that you make is you miss the ability you're wrong on the ability to backfill so that where you pull somebody out of, you leave a void.
Yeah.
When you do it, you're pretty sure you can backfill, but almost all the time there's a gap. There's a hole there.
I'm shrink.
Yeah, it happens. Now the key to that is how fast can you recover? You don't want to just damage that hole that you just pulled out. How fast can you recover? Sometimes it works where it's seamless, not very often. But once again, you look at the whole and say, you know what, we're better off as a whole than we are just, focusing on this one piece. And the other thing too is that sometimes people, when you put them in roles that are uncomfortable for them, not everybody can handle that. They can be really good at something. And then you think those skill sets will transfer to somewhere else and they're not. And when that happens, you got to be quick to recognize it and fix it. You can't just, because it's your fault. It's you made the choice to do this. And boy, that didn't really working out. we're better off to, and we had to do that. We had to do some of that. We had people that left the company in that period because they just, they couldn't scale. They couldn't, be part of a bigger organization, not an Exxon type, but a bigger organization. And they couldn't, they got passed by people that were better at it than they were, and they couldn't deal with it.
Well, that was my view when I was 29. I looked around and I'm like, hey, I don't, this company's now 12. I joined when there was 12 commercial people. Then there was 600. I remember, people going, hey, look, you can't talk to that lady like that. I'm like, oh, well, I talked to Gil that way. Exactly
Yeah.
the same way. I'm talking to Debbie the same way. Oh, Debbie complained. Debbie's got a gun in her office. Is she going to shoot you? I think it was really important for me to go to the UK. For me, I saw it as I needed a little distance from you and Chuck because you guys are really seriously alpha dogs, and throwing me into the not knowing was great for me. And I would call you when I had a problem. And I did have to make those phone calls from time to time, but I wonder, I was hoping you were going to go to a place where you held on to people maybe too long. Like that's another era I think people can make. The guys that start with you in the first 3 or 4 years, they may be joining a small company, and then when it gets super big, they don't really want to be a part of that. Did you have people start, they've capped out?
Yeah.
But you're a very loyal guy. Like that's one of the things most
Right.
people don't know about you. Dude, this guy kept people on that. I actually think that was the right thing to do spiritually, but it did create some problems, right? Because some of them had a hard time.
Yeah.
And maybe that would have been me too, perhaps in the United, had I stayed in the US. Did any of that occur?
But I am loyal. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that occurred. But I am loyal. I remember people who were there when it was tough. And so there was, one guy who you and I both know who ended up having to run off, but he had chance after chance after chance after chance because he was there when the times were tough. And there's a lot of people that are really good when it's going good. But when in times are tough, and I would do the same thing today.
Yeah.
Because I think you got to reward loyalty, and you got to reward effort, and you got to reward toughness and hanging in there when things aren't going good. But I'll use me as an example. Okay. When you talk about the transition from startup small company to larger public company, the stuff I love to do the most is do deals. Okay. That's what I was born doing. I love it. But I had to transition away from that. And it wasn't easy because I had to be more of a manager, more of a, kind of a strategic, growth. I want to jump in the deal and, I want to go do it. But I learned the hard way that as you grow, you will be the restrictor
Yeah.
if you continue to do that. It is really, really hard for entrepreneurial deal guys to do that. I've seen that at Williams, all with this group. I've seen it with ArcLight Capital that I consulted with. Every part of and the NGC Dynegy days is it's really, really hard, and some people just can't do it. I will admit I had a heck of a time doing it. I remember when I retired in 2002, I looked at my calendar for the previous year, and 90% of my meetings in my calendar book were all internal.
Mm.
And my skill set and my joy was doing deals externally, right? I like to go, give me a challenge to try to get Exxon to do business with Exxon. And I took that on and was like, it was so rewarding and it was so fun to do that when I finally got it over the finish line. But you can't do that. And that's hard. Chuck had the same transition.
Yeah, no, I saw both of you guys struggle with it, and it's really
Yeah.
helped me to not solve a commercial guy's problem, right? Like, you can really step in and suppress somebody if you're not careful, especially strong personality. So I think I actually thought you did a really good job of delegating, considering the kind of chemistry we all had. We definitely weren't the typical pencils in the old pencil box. I don't think I think I first described the first 6 months of being with you guys. I think you guys wanted to fire me or something. And I'm like, bro, I'm just having a hard time figuring out what part of the carousel to jump on and what freaking direction you guys are going. I mean, and then all of a sudden, turn around, like, okay, what's the flow here? I needed to get kind of the cadence of this circus crew that I had joined. Brilliant people though, man. It was just so stimulating to be like Don Sinclair. I hated working for Don. Had headaches every day. I learned a lot from Sinclair. I was able to bifurcate these two things. Okay, I don't like his management style, but that mofo one day, he did a deal with Candy Burnett at a discount to the market. I said, bro, well, like, you didn't have to give all that shit away. He's like, gotta get to first to steal second, Gary. Well, that was awesome. That's an awesome maxim, man. Gotta get to first to steal second.
And you still remember it.
Oh, I still remember something you told me. I think crude oil nat gas was going down to 80 cents. Crude oil was, $30. And I said, bro, nobody's going to be drilling at these prices. And you looked at me and went, drillers spend 6 years in college figuring out how to drill. It's not about price. They're going to drill holes in the ground, dude, till the end of time. For sure. That is what they do. I have taken that message. Like, they're going to process credit card transactions, whether they work or not. Dude, this is what people do, okay? They're going to mine Bitcoin. Producers are going to drill wherever the hell they think they can drill. That was just such a fascinating piece of logic. Like, who would have thought? And then you look at all the innovation in fracking. It came at $10 to $30 in crude oil. It came through price pressure to innovate. That's what I love about markets.
Right. That's exactly what happens. But I think too, back that we were talking about the one thing manager, what I learned the hard way is that, I'm a doer. And so and you kind of touched on it a little bit about getting people to kind of come along with you. If you try to do it all, which is what at times I tried to do it all. You get, first of all, you get so big that you get up to here with it. And then your people don't grow either as well. And so it's really hard for entrepreneurs and senior guys in startup like that to basically get good people around you and let them do their thing, and to resist the temptation to jump in and do it for them. Because I can do it faster, better, quicker, and back to Sinclair's got to get the first before I can get the second. It's the same thing with a company like that. You have to be able to allow your folks to learn and to do things and to grow for the whole to grow. Otherwise, you're the restrictor.
Right.
And there was times during our growth period that Chuck and I both were the restrictor, because we had a hard time. We were young and learning as well. We had a hard time kind of pulling away from that because it was what we liked. I'll give you a little anecdote.
That's what got you there. It's what got you there.
Right. I'll give you a little anecdote.
Going to get you to the next level, right? Yeah.
Right. A little anecdote with Williams. Okay. First day I go on the board with Williams in August of 2016. I'm doing a onboarding session with them, and they're going through their whole business, everything they're doing, right? And I got the whole management team there. And you know me, I'm asking a million questions, right? That's how I learn. I just ask questions and I challenge stuff and all that. Well, I spent a 2-day session, and the CEO answered 90% of the questions. And I said, this is on a $60 billion company.
That's not what you wanted to hear, is it?
Well, I said to him, about a week later, I said, Alan, I said, you're obviously way too much in the detail. Either you don't trust your people or you like that role better, but you can't be doing that and not doing the CEO job. And I said, I'm going to create, there's going to be a chairman, there's going to be a CEO and a COO. I'm the chairman. you can pick either the other two, but we're going to have two jobs here, and one guy's going to be a COO, and he's going to answer all those questions for the next board meeting that,
Cool.
that comes. That was a hard discussion with a guy that was a lifelong Williams guy that had been CEO for 8 years at the time. But it was because he was the restrictor of the organization. Everything was going through him, and it was because that's where he felt most comfortable. Well, you fast forward to today, okay? He hired a really good COO who does a great job, and Alan is now viewed. He was the keynote speaker at the COP28 in Dubai, with all the climate change. Anybody who wants to talk about natural gas around the world, he's on it. He's on the National Petroleum Council. He and Joe Manchin are on like a first name basis. All the politicians. He's doing what a CEO of a $60 billion energy company should be doing. He can't answer questions of mine anymore when I ask details, which is good.
Right.
But you got to have a catalyst sometimes to basically pry that away, because people have a tendency to kind of go to what they feel comfortable with and what they like.
For sure.
And that's what everybody does. And your role as a manager and senior guy at some point will be, you're going to have discipline to be able to step away from that, get the good people around you and do the job. Let them do their job. If they don't do the job, get rid of them and get somebody else. But you can't go in and try to do their job and fix it, because then you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it's work like a champ.
Let's shift over to all the things that you've done. What mistakes did you make that you look back today and go, if I'd have known that, I might have taken a different path? Any glaring like things that stand out?
Not really, because I think most of what I can think of, most of my role has been kind of a reactionary to an industry that's evolved over 15, 20 years. You always make mistakes on people. You think somebody's going to be, good and do it, and you don't, and it doesn't work. But I think I've been pretty good at when I recognize it doesn't work, to change it. I don't let it.
Some of the bigger eras, was it on junior people or senior people as you were scaling?
Senior people mainly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
Because the junior people they'll follow the lead. Okay. They're all new and young usually, and they'll follow the lead. If you look at what screws up cultures in companies, it's usually kind of the middle manager guys.
HR.
The senior guys, generally can kind of see that, see things coming and are pretty good at that. The junior guys, they're going to follow the lead. It's that middle management guy who's comfortable in their own area. They don't really want to rock the boat too bad. They're a B performer. They're not an A performer because they're comfortable and right where they're at.
Yeah.
And that's the area that you really you have. And it's hard to deal with those people, because you can't have a company of all A players. There's got to be a role for everybody, because you'll kill each other.
You'll believe that, huh? Because I actually, if I had a criticism, I think we hired some outsiders that did not fit. I think we hired some outsiders that were too polished for our company. One in particular I'm thinking about that, I've never really known any deals he's done, nor do I know anybody that doesn't like him. Everyone loves this cat. Now he hated me, but I've never seen a guy that's a really good deal maker that everyone loves him. And this guy came in all polished, very organized, well-spoken. And I'm like, this guy's like gonna stab everybody in the face. And I just noticed that the reason I laughed about the HR, it seemed like at some point in time, someone told Chuck, hey, look, you got to upgrade your people. We need some people that look good on Wall Street. And it is those very people that, like, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I can think of two of them that I looked at you a couple of times and said, this guy's going to stab you in the back, man. And sure enough, and those are the mistakes that entrepreneurs, like, they steal my energy, man. When I make a mistake like that, that's an unnecessary mistake. It just steals a lot from the joy of running the business. That's kind of where I was going to try to figure out any tips for people to stay away from those type of mistakes.
But you can't hire all of one personality. If I hired 10 guys like you, it'd have freaking imploded.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You got to have a blend. And
Yeah,
at that
but,
point,
but you hired one or two or three of those type people, and they can run off a ton of people like me. One of them tried to get rid of me, and I think that
right,
would be a mistake for Clearinghouse. It'd have been a mistake for me, but I would have been fine. I think you
right.
guys probably looked at him and go, "Do we really want Gary outside our organization beating up on us?" That I suspect that's
Yeah, but it's all part of a blend and a balance, because when you're public, putting you up to our public shareholders would scare the crap out of them. You had to have guys that had we used to have discussions. We were all pretty young back then, and we kept talking about hiring guys with gray hair
yeah.
because people got scared because we were so young as a group and an organization. So that was part of it was kind of trying to get some, so we used to call them gray beards. We need gray beard guys. I noticed you got your gray beard going on now. You'd be a perfect qualifier for that.
Yeah, well, and I've matured 20 or 30 years, so I'm probably just about ready for that engagement.
Right. Well, and that was a big part of it too, is trying to strike a balance there because we were in a pretty highly capital intensive business. We needed that public access to capital, and so you were playing to shareholders as much as you were playing to the deal piece of it. You still had to have that deal culture that was there, but you had to have and you have somebody running HR to take care of all the, just HR stuff that you had to do. And it was fun back in the day when it was just 10 of us and we had nothing to lose and we were just, rolling. That was a lot of fun. But it was also a lot of fun building something that was of scale and significance that people to this day, 25 years ago, still talk about it. Whenever I go into an industry deal and everything, somebody will come up to me and say, "Remember when, we did a deal?" When I started, just a little side note, with Williams on the board, there was two other guys that came into the board with me at the same time, and one of them was a guy named Bill Spence. He was the chairman and CEO of PP&L, Pennsylvania Power and Light. And I said to Alan, I said, "Is that the same Bill Spence I used to do gas deals with at Delmarva back in the 80s and 90s?" He goes, "I don't know." So I got online, looked it up, and I'm going, "It is the same guy." So yeah, here's a guy that I hadn't seen in 25 years. Because he went, he's in a different path. He was in the electric utility industry. And so he and I go on the board at the same time, and two guys that did deals when we were 25 years old in 1987.
Yeah. So hey, on that part, when 1987, 1985, you join Chuck, you take a deal, he flies up to see you, closes the deal because you were weak. You were like, okay, the culture at Transco and Northern, all these companies is not really up for me. I think that's a really important message. Hey, if the culture of your company isn't really supporting you, don't stay there forever. You're not going to be happy, right? You need to find it because you've been happy.
Or find a way to change and influence the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. In your case, you were like, it's going to be too big of a push, so I'm going to do it from the outside. Did you ever make the correct assessment as to what the opportunity was going to be like? You started in 85, you left in 02, right? Did you expect ever, well, let me ask you like this. Did you correctly estimate the opportunity, or did you grossly underestimate what was going to happen?
Grossly underestimated.
Like grossly,
Yeah,
you mean by 10x, 100x, 1000x?
uh, 1,000 plus, I would think.
See, this is where I'm going. I've been in this whole disruptive industry thing. We always underestimate how big it's going to be.
Right, right. What I didn't realize is I didn't realize how long it would take the big boys to change to move the aircraft carrier. I thought mistakenly that, boy, we got a pretty tight window here to kind of move and be quick. But I would argue with you that they're still, here we are 40 years later, they're still haven't got that aircraft carrier pointed in the right direction. And there's still opportunities there. We at Williams, we bought up a gas marketing company from Southern Company called Sequent here a year and a half ago at my urging, because Williams didn't have enough commercial talent. Even though we sell capacity and we were the biggest pipeline company in the country, but our commercial team wasn't very good. So we bought them for $50 million, bought a platform. They made $270 million in the first year. And everybody's like, wow, what a great investment. It's like, how did you know that? And I'm like, I didn't know they'd make $270 million. What I knew was, when you touch a third of the gas in this country, and if you put commercial talent on an asset like that,
Totally.
there's nickels, dimes, quarters dropping all over the place, all that are there, that if somebody recognizes it, they're going to pick them up. And that's exactly what happened. We're not taking a bunch of risk. It's all pipeline
We're
arbitrage.
just arbitraging. Yeah.
It's the same model that we used at NGC 25 years ago. It hadn't changed. I have a son who trades gas in the industry now. He's 40 years old and doing really well. He'll make some kind of comment about some point in Kansas, Mullinville. And I'm like, yeah, is that still doing a couple BCF a day? And he'll look at me like, what?
Yeah.
I said, that hadn't moved in the last 40 years. It's still there. This industry hasn't changed that much. It's just grown a lot.
Yes.
So the opportunity set's so big.
See, the message, Steve, I mean, this is an awesome message for the guys in the financial, fintech, crypto, Bitcoin industry. This is a smart guy. I'm a relatively smart guy. Steve and I both agree that we grossly underestimated how long the culture of these big companies would provide opportunities for really smart people. So the message I take in this new venture I'm doing in the digital, what I call the digital asset industry, Visa and MasterCard will not move any faster than ExxonMobil. These are the same type management people, okay? They go to the same school. They talk to the same consultants. It's the same playbook, and they're reporting to exactly the same analysts on Wall Street. So they all behave a certain way. So this has given me, my experience with you gave me so much confidence in moving into another whole industry and not getting all caught up on the nomenclature, right? The move to the UK was awesome for me because I had to go from MMBTUs to decatherms and to therms and to kilowatt hours. I had to make that language transition. And once I understood that, everything else just falls into place, right? It's supply and demand. Is there too much supply, too much demand? The pipe's tight. What's happening? I mean, I think the energy business, I've been telling all these Bitcoin people, and I've been focused on this industry now for about 5 years. I'm actually becoming a relative expert in the area of blockchain and Bitcoin. The largest Bitcoin miners on planet Earth are going to be the fossil fuel producers. And I don't know where you're at with that, or if Williams, or if you're looking at this. I think the nuclear power industry, for the first time, doesn't have to sell baseload. They can sell 18-hour power and take 6 hours and mine Bitcoin with it. And they're no longer a 3-cent kilowatt baseload producer, right? They can literally turn on and off. All they need is a data center. And they're mining Bitcoin, if you don't really fully appreciate what it is, but you're basically turning a finite resource called energy into something that can be stored digitally, and you can hold that, transport it, store it in a form of currency. And to me, the big offtake, I mean, Todd Essie, Todd's doing some stuff right now, mining Bitcoin, arbitraging the power systems, looking for that gap, right? So all these Bitcoin miners should take the very top of these peaking stuff out. I think you're going to start to see that. And I think you're going to start to see the nukes and stranded gas in Dakota, Wyoming, wherever, where they're paying $2 for transport. Shit, man, just mine it right there. At $1, you'll be the most competitive energy inputted into Bitcoin. And some of these miners, man, they are so sharp energy. These guys are walking in saying, I'm going to mine Bitcoin, but they don't own the energy. And I think that's just a disaster. They're buying 7 cents a kilowatt to produce a $35,000, $40,000 Bitcoin. Do y'all look at that at all? Steve, have you studied Bitcoin? My audience will hate me if I don't ask the question to you.
No. We have a new ventures group that does a lot of we're hydrogen hubs and all the things that kind of affect the pipeline business. That's what you're talking about is kind of the next generation beyond that. I mean, we're when you touch a third of the gas in this country, you gotta, as I say in our strategy meetings all the time, we got to make sure we don't get blockbustered out of the industry, which is technology changes, and then you're stuck with $60 billion worth of assets. So do we want to be in hydrogen? Not necessarily, but we want to make sure we understand if hydrogen ever does become viable, we want to make sure we understand it. We want to make sure it goes through our infrastructure to be delivered. We're doing solar, we're doing wind, we're doing stuff like that. Are we big producers, big believers in that? No, it's not very competitive and it's very expensive, but technology changes. So be on the cutting edge of that kind of stuff so that you understand the technology changes so that you can position your business to be funny. You say that about nuclear. Because the COP28 thing that last week just came out and said nuclear and natural gas is the future. So I was talking to our CEO yesterday, and I said, "Well, we can get in the nuclear business now because now all of a sudden nuclear around the world is now back in favor." I think what's actually going to happen is, and there's several companies that are looking at this, is the little modular nuclear facilities. That's going to be the answer. It's not these great big behemoth, that we've built in this country, which are fine, but it's going to be these little small nichey places that you can put near a data center, near a load pocket of growth and stuff like that, that aren't going to be, they're going to be small. They're going to look like a processing plant. And they're not these big massive that you're going to have to sit next to a lake or a river or something like that. We've thought that was going to happen for a while. I know Duke's studied that a lot, and it was a big nuclear player on the East Coast. They think that's going to be a solution too as well. But it's all going to start with energy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean,
and our whole economy is built. These people who say we're going to get rid of all the fossil fuels, our entire economy backbone is built on energy.
Dude, I mean, you can't. Half the Tesla car is made with fossil fuel. Okay, I mean, cool. You want to run it on a battery? Awesome, but I don't know what I'm gonna be sitting in. Won't have any tires. Stuff in my house is made from petroleum, if not 80% of it. So it's not going away anytime. I think actually we're going to have enough energy forever because if Europe does what I think it's going to do, it's going to go totally green. It's going to create $1 trillion bond for 100 years, build super big nukes, and all the fossils go somewhere else. And to me, that's the only way they get out of their economic duress. And that's what, an 8-year project. So it's forever.
Well, and they're going to make their manufacturers not competitive. You're going to see all the manufacturing business leave Europe. It's already started.
It's already started, man. How can you have a manufacturing business if you don't have secure supply of dense energy?
Right. You can't, and competitive cost.
That on wind, dude.
That's what I keep trying to explain to people when we talk about that. I mean, I can see why the Europeans and the Asians, China and all that, while they're promoting that kind of stuff, because where we're paying $3 an MMBTU for gas, they're paying 25.
Right.
Their economics are completely different than ours. We
Right.
have a resource here that makes us competitive around the world, big time, on everything we produce. Now, 25 years ago, we started moving everything offshore. Guess what? It's all coming back. Now you're seeing manufacturing, all kinds of stuff coming back to the US. Why? Because of our energy advantage that we have in this country. And we got to keep that. That's a huge advantage that we got to continue to exploit.
So Steve, I have a magic wand, and I can put you in a position where you get to tell your 25-year-old self, your Steve Bergstrom, 25, 26 years old, what would you tell yourself, man? And it could be simply as, hey, don't underestimate the opportunities, or don't do this, or do this differently. What would you, I mean, I have a lot of personal advice to myself. But one thing I know, I've grossly underestimated my personal ability, and I've underestimated the opportunities in the world, like at a massive level. Even though I've been really successful, I think I've really mismanaged the assets that I've been given. And that's probably what I would tell my 25-year-old is, hey, actually expand your goals much, much, much bigger than they were. I just was thinking too small.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably normal for most, other than maybe Elon Musk. I think most people think too small. They don't realize the opportunity. And it's really hard. You got to be very adaptable and have the ability to pivot, because there's nobody smart enough to figure out exactly where these markets go. Your ability to pivot and not fall in love with your opinion, your direction, your approach is critical in any of these things, because it is not a straight line from point A to point B. It is very crooked, and your ability to pivot and every decision you make along the way, you should think about in the back of your mind: if I'm wrong, where's my pivot point? Where's my milepost? And make sure that you adjust, because you're going to need to, because it's not a straight line. I think it's one of the strengths that I have is that I when I see things that I react to them. I don't just kind of put them off. And you know, it, 5 years ago we started our ESG group. 5 years ago, before everybody started talking about ESG. Why? Because I was on the foundation board at Iowa State and University, and we were getting pressure from the students about shutting down our coal plant. They were already starting to beat the drums. And I'm like, okay, this is starting to happen at a grassroots level. This is going to boil up to be, we're going to be the bad guys. And we better get on top of this. And as I termed it, I want to be the cleanest shirt in a dirty laundry basket, because I can't change the fact I'm in the fossil fuel business. But we have investors in this company, several of which have told me we are number one on their list for ESG, as far as compliance and ESG, of all the energy companies. Well, those are the kinds of things you kind of got to see coming. You got to put up something in place and then have the ability to pivot if things change. Over the last 6 months, that's kind of died down a little bit as Europe got scared with the whole Russian deal. Even though the Europeans are still talking about it, our guys go over there and meet with shareholders, and they're in the freaking dark. They can't run their office lights because they don't have enough power. They're trying to conserve, and it's like a third world country. It's like, we're not going to operate like that in the U.S., and you shouldn't have to in Germany and every, well, I guess I was going to say France, but they got nuclear, so they're good. It's these other guys around them that like that. But I think the ability to react and pivot to markets is probably one of the biggest skills you got to have, because there's nobody can predict where it's going.
I had
And you're going to
I had a private equity guy tell me the other day. He said, don't ever use the word pivot with me. Pivoters are losers, dude. I don't want to hear about pivots. I'm like, Dude, what are you talking about? Pivots are for losers. I'm constantly pressing the envelope to see, hey, like you and I talk one day. That's, hey, Gary, there's one thing pushing somebody over the edge. There's another thing pushing them slightly over the edge. Make sure they have a hand to grab them. And I think I looked at you and went, how do you know where the edge is, dude, till they fall over? And you started laughing. But like, you can't push these guys too hard, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
The knack there is, I used to say, you got to push them to the cliff, grab them by the shirt just as they're falling, pull
yeah.
them back. And that's a skill set that you got to develop over time. You're not born with that. It's a feel. It's a feel thing. And some of them are going to fall. You're going to push them and they're going to fall.
Oh,
It just happens.
you didn't tell
Uh,
me that part when you were disciplining me, son.
yeah.
You
Well,
were
I
giving
mean,
me the
yeah,
old story.
but it does happen. It does happen. And that's a skill set that develops over time. You don't learn that at 25 years old.
So you're 25 or 30. It's 2023. I'm your like. What industry do you go into? You know
Oh,
everything about yourself. You're Mr. Disruptor. You love numbers. What business do you go into?
uh, I'm not smart enough to understand any other industries other than the energy. And what I knew about energy when I started work in 1980 was I didn't even know there was such a thing as natural gas.
Yeah,
The only thing I knew about gas was I put it in my car to make it run. I didn't know there was any other kind.
me either,
Um,
man. I thought gas
yeah,
pipelines were above the ground. Ron
yeah,
Mitchmore hired me. I said, dude, we must be a small pipeline company. I drove from Houston to
yeah.
Corpus. He's like, well, you think these pipelines are above the ground? I'm like, yeah, man. He's like, I cannot believe we hired you. I didn't need to know all that. I never went to an oil platform until then we did the deal in the UK on that storage. I had a map in front of me. I didn't need to go look at all that infrastructure and get confused with,
Right,
I've got all this cost here. I got to recover it. Nobody guarantees you to recover a return or a capital investment just because you made an investment in the wrong place, right? There's no
right.
guarantee on that. Well, I think your answer is right because I'll tell you, you know more about energy than anyone I know at a both macro and micro level. I think this is maybe a good place to end. Is I think too many people, especially guys building businesses, they want to know about too much of a business instead of just like really honing in on one industry and becoming the nuts of that industry, like the sayer, right? The guy that with the knowledge, and you really know the space. These industries are massive. I wanted to change because I get bored. I didn't want to go through the whole post Enron debacle and I thought it was going to flatline. I think it did flatline for about 10 years. And I just needed to get out and go do something different. I think the concentration is really cool that, you've spent how long in this industry? 40 years?
43 years.
Yeah. And it's treated you pretty well, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great business. I mean, it's one of the few things that I can think of that everybody has to have. You cannot do without it.
Yeah.
And to have a business like that, because you can name all these other businesses that people can live without.
Credit
That's one
card.
you can't.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can live without all this stuff.
Right. The energy you cannot. Okay. Our whole, economy, everything's built on the backbone of energy, which is what these environmentalists haven't yet figured out. So if you believe that, which I do, then as I said on like growing businesses is that once you figure out what you're good at and what you just keep driving it, you can move it into other spots of the subsets of the energy industry in this example, or the credit card industry or whatever. But recognize what you're good at and drive it. And because the companies that fail get off into other things um, that they don't understand, and then they get in trouble.
Yeah. Their pivot was wrong or their
Yeah,
expansion was wrong.
yeah,
But like if you're 25 or 30, at 2023, there's no way you're coming in the energy space. There is no you creating Natural Gas Clearinghouse today. Like your
No,
timing had to be.
timing's good, but I'll tell you what, because of the fact that everybody thinks that energy is going away, there are a ton of opportunities in energy. Not, you'll never go back to where you can recreate a business that goes complete transformation like it did. You'll never create that. However, um, because everybody thinks energy is going away and it's out of favor. I mean, I'm always a contrarian looking at things when nobody else likes it, but everybody's got to have it. There's a lot of money to be made in spaces like that. It's not like the way we did it back then, but there's still like the physical art business. If I was 25 years old today, I would go back. I would go and get in the physical art business because nobody's in that space like we were back then. I mentioned about Sequent. There's about 3 or 4 players like that. That's the only public company that's in it. There's private companies that do it, and they're making $200 to $300 million on just picking up the small loose change all over the place. It's crazy because there's no competition. Everybody trades financially now. You got a lot of banks and guys like that. They don't understand the physical flow of the molecule.
Yeah, and they don't care. They just trade.
And they don't care. Yeah. Right? They don't care. So the physical arbitrage business, which is very synergistic with the pipeline business, because the arbitrage is driven off of pipeline capacity and disconnects, storage, things like that. That's how you get there. If we had our infrastructure in 1990 and we could plop it in today to today's gas market, we'd make $1 billion a year doing it with that infrastructure that we had. So I still think that even mature businesses, as they evolve over time, I still think there's opportunities in there to take niche things like that and expand them. And frankly, today it's probably easier because you got a roadmap that's there than it was back in the 80s when we were like, trying to deregulate a complete commodity that had never seen this ever before. We were dealing with new stuff every day, which is what made it fun, because you think what's coming around the corner, and you get around the corner and the freight train come at you. And so then you got to back up and go another way.
Yeah.
Which makes it exciting as a 25-year-old, not so good as a 66-year-old.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But see, we're still like at Williams today. Okay. You would think that, the most fun I have is the strategy meetings that we have in July every year, where we're talking about what energy looks like around the world in 2040. Where's demand going to be? Where's supply coming from? All this stuff. And we got this I've never been part of an organization that's got this think tank.
Yeah.
Guys, we got a whole bunch of dudes that just study this stuff all the time. I mean, we never had that. And it's really energizing to me to be able to sit there with a bunch of people in the industry that are really smart and talk about, okay, some of these assumptions. Do we really think this is where this thing's going in 20?
So where does that lead you? I mean, do we, like, I lived through the whole, hey, peak oil, we've hit it. $100 crude oil, we're at what, $2.80, $3 nat gas. Do prices just continue here forever?
Well, producers are getting more and more efficient. Okay, they're drilling more with less. I mean, you look at the economics of this stuff. When I first started in the industry, an onshore gas well of 3 to 5 million cubic feet a day was a monster. Okay, now we're turning on wells for producers at 100 million a day in the Haynesville in North Louisiana. I mean, you're talking about, hundreds of times more. So the market, as these prices stay where they're, the beauty behind that as an infrastructure company, you don't really care as an infrastructure company what the price is. You just want it to be good enough so that the producers continue to drill, baby, drill, which is what they do, which is what we talked about earlier. So keep drilling. and I've never been a big fan of the drilling business because it's a single digit capital business. It always has been. But yet that's what they want to keep doing. That's okay.
That's what they
Because
do.
what happens in low pricing environments, it drives demand. So when the price is low, then demand continues to grow. So the pie gets bigger. And so that as an infrastructure company, you are able to continue to sell infrastructure and build infrastructure to support demand growth. So that whole model works great. And everybody says we can't drill any more wells at these prices. Yeah, you can. Um, Offshore as an example. It used to be you drill a well offshore, and it'd take you 7 years before it get online. Okay. Now these guys are drilling around platforms. So we got two huge finds that are coming on within 2 years of when they found them offshore. You know what that does to your NPV analysis on something like that? Makes their return, instead of 32%, it's 50%, because they're getting it on.
Accelerating the process.
Right.
Get the
Right.
market and turn it into fiat. Yeah. Into money.
Right. And so that's what drives the supply side. And that'll happen in other businesses too, as well. Difficult pricing environment actually is good for businesses like that because it drives innovation and it drives, people to change their mindset and the way they operate. And it's done that in energy for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And there's more to go.
But with all the research that Williams has, this will be the last question. With all the research, I mean, do you see, because we've had this conversation 1,000 times, the $100 oil scenario, peak oil, as a global issue? Where does that go? Because I don't see anything over 100. I think we hit $100, then we come right down to 62, and 62 is going to be the number. They're making 15, 20 bucks, right? With some volatility, but where do you see this going? Because I don't see a $300 or $180 crude oil. Am I right?
No. You're going to see ebbs and flows of pricing. But you're seeing also demand continuing to get pressured on crude oil with gasoline and oil. Natural gas, on the other hand, is got. I mean, I had them analyze our think tank guys because I want to make sure that we were not drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And I said I want to go through and I want you to look at every renewable project we have in this country. I want every 100% electric vehicles. I want every draconian negative for demand thing that can possibly happen, because we might be wrong on some of these things. And I want to see what that looks like to 2050. And stunning to me, it came back that even with all those assumptions, which can't happen, natural gas demand worldwide grows 1.5% to 2% per year to 2050. Now that's a pretty big market that with pretty big opportunities there when you're part of the cheapest supplier around the world. And that's why you're seeing all this LNG push, all this infrastructure push, and all that kind of stuff, because we're not the only ones who see that. Everybody else is seeing the same thing. I talked to a guy from a major oil company who runs their renewable group, and he goes, the biggest dilemma that we have is, while we're getting pressured from the politicians to put less fossil fuels, more renewables, he said, our analysis shows the more renewables that we put in this country, the more the demand for fossil fuels increases. And I said, you know what? We see the same thing. So quit fighting it. Let these guys blow their brains out and continue to do it. Guess what? Your business is going to continue growing. Your margins are going to get better.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of those opportunities around, even mature businesses, that I think with people who think that way and think differently, I still think there's opportunities in a lot. You don't necessarily have to be in new stuff.
I mean, you're basically saying there is no industry that's efficient.
None.
I
You know,
agree. I don't even think the markets are efficient. You know, this bullshit about hey, Wall Street's efficient. Wall Street's 99% of the time wrong.
right. Yeah.
On, you know, I don't think it's efficient because you don't have accurate data. So how could it possibly be efficient? Steve, it's been a real pleasure connecting with you. This was probably one of the interviews, conversations I really wanted to have. I do all these celebrities and stuff, but you're in my mind, you've been a great coach, great friend. Anything that you want to share on closing 2023 out?
Well, I appreciate it. And it's good, good kind of reminiscing back to sometimes I don't realize all the things that I learned back in the day that I still use today, unless somebody asks me.
Yeah.
They're just kind of ingrained in the way I think. And I guess the last thing I would say is just, um, if I was 25 or 30 years old, find something that you're passionate about, that you really like, find a business, find something and just, work it and get good people around you, that'll challenge you. And you can make it work. I don't care what business that you're in. I don't care if it's in the tire manufacturing business or whatever. Um, every single successful business I've ever seen, the one common denominator that they always have, great people, every single one. And as a leader, you got to be careful. You got to be careful to fall in that trap of, oh, I can't hire anybody smarter than I am. To the contrary, you should hire everybody who's smarter than you,
Totally.
because great people will drive great businesses, and
That's
average people and not very good people will fail.
yeah.
And that was the basic model for that, and everything that I've been involved in, including Williams. The senior management team, when I took over, there's only one guy still left on the senior management team, and he's the CEO.
Mm,
We have replaced everyone on the senior management team because they weren't good enough. And they just limped along and limped along and limped along. And I'm like, no, you don't have the kind of talent you need to run a $60 billion company. And now I get compliments from our shareholders saying, you have the best management team in the industry. I said, I know that.
that's
That's by design. Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah. So
That's
it's all about people. And there's still people out there that have the right mindset, that have with the right, you know, structure. You were a good example of you had to be you wouldn't have worked going to Exxon or going to Shell or Northern Natural or anything like that. You needed to be in a kind of a freewheeling structure that,
I tell everyone, man, like the biggest, best decision I made was to leave Seagull and join a platform that it wasn't always fun working with you guys either. It was tough, man. I mean, I had
yeah,
every day working for Sinclair, dude. It was not fun. And I admire the guy, okay, but like it was just not, he's not the funnest guy to work for. Uh, but I learned a lot, and I knew the platform. I mean, Goldman offered me a job, some people in the UK offered me a job. I don't want to work for those people. Like I
yeah,
know what I have here. I know these guys. One, y'all trusted me a tremendous. I mean, I earned so much credibility from you guys. Remember that problem we had when y'all called me in Italy? I mean, I took a bath on a trade we put on. I remember Chuck calling up saying, "Hey, let's double the position." I said, "Steve, dude, this wrong double, dude. Let's not double. We made a mistake. Let's close the position out. Count our, blessings. Hey, we made an error. Shut the fucking position down and let's go do something else." And that's when we bought the storage. But we had to close that mistake.
yeah,
And but I was grateful, so grateful to have a platform that allowed me to flex my muscles because I didn't have a great education, right? I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't know all these people, wasn't well polished. So it was an awesome journey for me. That first platform taught me everything about business that I could possibly need to know, and irrespective of the industry. So thank you for that. And I think you've impacted a lot of people, Steve, and I just commend you. I think the other thing I'd say is that not only have you hired good people and you've been at the right place at the right time, but you don't have any shit in your closet. Like I've never seen you do a dodgy deal. Now maybe you have, and I just didn't see it. I don't see a lot of stink or noise around you. And I think that's the other thing entrepreneurs need to know. Hey, look, your reputation, like you can't make that up. Okay. And nobody can steal the reputation from you, even when they come knocking on your door and saying shit about you. If your closet's clean, there's nothing to lean on. And I think that's where a lot of people get fucked up, is they're doing shit on the edges and they get compromised. So I've never seen you do that, and I really admire it. So thanks a
Yep.
lot, man.
Well, thank you.
Merry Christmas. Tell Debbie.
Yeah. You too.
All right, buddy.
Thank you. Take care.